What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to be doing a complete hero guide for the best defensive hero in Star Wars Battlefront 2, Obi-Wan Kenobi. In these hero guides we're going to be covering everything that could possibly need covering, from base stats, ability stats, the best star cards for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, as well as some of the best maps to choose them on, some general tips for those game modes, the best star cards for heroes versus villains and HvV Showdown, which enemy characters you need to look out for, and then lastly covering some general tips for the hero game modes as well. So as you can see, this guide is going to be breaking down every single aspect of the hero. If you're new around here and you end up enjoying this video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more Battlefront 2 content, and be sure to hit that notification bell as well so that you are notified each time I upload more videos like this going forward. But anyway, with that out of the way, guys, let's get stuck right into it. So starting off with Obi-Wan's base stats, and his stats are definitely up there with some of the best in the game, although he does still have his weaknesses. Starting off with his base HP, he has 750, which is the average for most saber users. However, as for how much health he can regenerate at once, he can regenerate 300 HP, which is the absolute highest in the game, and that can be boosted even further with star cards, so be sure to stick around to the star cards section of the video. In terms of his damage, he deals 130 damage from the front and 150 damage from behind, both pretty much the average for saber users, with some being slightly higher or lower, but most saber heroes do fall into this same bracket. Now, his swing speed is 1.8 swings per second, which again is about on par with most others in the game, although considering the fact that he's not really meant to be an overly aggressive hero, that is actually a pretty decent swing speed. His weakness, however, is to do with his swing stamina, as he can actually swing only 10 times before running out of stamina, which is definitely down on the lower end compared to most other saber heroes. Now, as for his blocking stamina, however, he can actually block a whopping 25 lightsaber attacks before running out of stamina, and a whole lot of blaster fire too, although that's pretty much impossible to test in terms of numbers. And just to give you guys context here, I believe the next highest in the game is 14, so he can literally block almost twice as many saber attacks as anyone else in the game, and this shows just how great he is on his defensive side of the game. Now, moving on to his abilities, and honestly his abilities aren't all that special, but they do all serve a purpose and can be really useful provided you do use them in the right situations. His left ability is the all-out push ability, and this is essentially just a force push. However, it has a charge up that increases the area of effect, or the range more specifically, so quickly double tapping it will make it nearly instant, or tapping it once and letting it charge, or holding it will allow you to charge it up. It deals 150 to 180 damage depending on whether it is fully charged or just used quickly, as the damage does slightly increase as you charge it up too, but it's not too much of a difference, and obviously being a force push, it will knock enemies off their feet as well. It has a 14-second cooldown, which is pretty decent honestly. It's a very clunky ability in that it causes you to kind of just stop still and use it, but the cooldown being short does at least add some value to it. Moving on, we have his middle ability, which is called Restrictive Mind Trick, and this one just causes anyone in the area of effect to be unable to use their abilities while it's active. The ability lasts for 6 seconds without any star cards, which is actually a fair amount of time to be honest, especially if you're pressing the enemy and they really need to use an ability. This one has a 20-second cooldown, which is slightly on the longer side, but honestly considering how useful this can be against enemy heroes in HvV, that is actually a pretty decent cooldown. Now, for his right ability we have Defensive Rush, and this is probably his best ability, at least in the trooper game modes anyway, sending Obi-Wan rushing forward while blocking all incoming fire from the front and slashing any enemies that he hits along the way, as well as allowing a powerful strike at the end. It deals 140 damage per hit with the lightsaber, and the final hit deals 200 damage if you do manage to land it, and like I said, while you are rushing forward it will block and deflect incoming fire. It has a 10-second cooldown, which is absolutely unreal considering how good the ability can be. With a certain star card it can become a one-hit kill on troopers, so being able to use that every 10 seconds is definitely very handy. So that's it for all of his base stats and abilities, and now we are going to move on to some tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, starting off with his best star cards. Keep in mind these cards are just a matter of opinion. There aren't really any loadouts in the game that are objectively the best or anything like that, but these are just what I find to work best in these game modes. The first card I'd recommend is the Jedi Resilience card, and this one increases Obi-Wan's health regeneration by up to 100 HP, allowing him to regen 400 HP altogether, which is more than half of his health obviously, so you can get down to having only 350 HP, and if you just fall back to safety you can actually regen back to full health, so that is absolutely insane, and in my opinion this is a must use card, especially for newer or less experienced players, as it really does give you a lot of leeway. The second card I'd recommend is the Forward card, and this one gives up to 40 more damage on his Defensive Rush lightsaber hits, making it a one-hit kill on all regular troopers other than a heavy. This turns the ability from something borderline useless to be honest into a one-hit killing machine, and it definitely makes makes that his best ability for these modes. The third card I'd recommend is the Give It All card, and this one just adds up to 2 meters of extra range on his all-out push, which really does help give Obi-Wan some added range to his playstyle. He is a fairly slow hero, and he also has a fairly small saber lunge for the most part, so adding some range just allows him to be a little bit more well-rounded, and it also adds a lot to his offensive side of the game since his defensive side is essentially as good as it needs to be already. Now moving on to the best maps to choose him on in Galactic Assault, the 3 maps that I personally think he's the best on are Kashyyyk, Endor and Naboo. Kashyyyk and Naboo are obviously both defensive maps where the Republic are defending, and generally defending with a hero is a little bit harder. However, he is a great defensive character obviously, and these maps really do tend to suit his playstyle because of that. Endor on the other hand is on offense, and although he is a defensive character, he can still play very well on offense as well, and with the tree cover alongside his crazy blocking stamina, it feels like it is pretty hard to actually take damage on this map sometimes, so Endor is another really solid map choice. Now moving on to some general tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, and like I just mentioned, Obi-Wan is obviously built almost purely for defense, and that's something just worth keeping in mind as you're playing because it is obviously important to stick to each hero's strengths. Now that doesn't mean that you just can't attack enemies and you have to just sit there blocking. He obviously can still do well in terms of getting kills and being aggressive, but it just requires a slightly different playstyle than someone like Luke, for example, who's mostly just good at full sending it, but Obi-Wan does require a little bit more patience. One huge positive of him being really well equipped on defense is that you can actually use that to your advantage on offense as well, which sounds weird, I know, but let me explain what I mean. If you're pushing the enemies and leading the front line as Obi-Wan, trying to sort of just help your teammates push up the map and clear out objectives, you're generally much safer than almost any other hero in that situation. If you're pushing into a room and getting some kills, but then you turn a corner and there's like 6 or 7 enemies standing there, that would usually cause quite a bit of trouble obviously. Someone like Luke might struggle to defend himself if he doesn't have his abilities cooled down to take those enemies out, so his defense wouldn't quite handle that situation. With Obi-Wan though, your blocking stamina is so powerful that if you do happen to get into a tough situation, you're much better equipped to actually deal with it defensively, and you do still have those offensive options like the defensive rush ability or even his all-out push, which I actually forgot to mention in the ability section that it gives you, I believe, 80% damage reduction while you're charging it up. So because you're generally going to be safer in those types of situations, that's actually what allows you to make up for it a bit on offense, because you don't have to play quite as passively with Obi-Wan as you would with everyone else, since he does have that defensive side to fall back on. Now with that being said, don't just expect to always survive those situations. If you swing spam a few enemies and drain your stamina, then your blocking stamina won't last long anyway, so it is still a bit of a balancing act just like every other hero, but he is slightly more forgiving, so I guess the point is to just not panic in those really dangerous situations. Be sure to use your block and fall back, and you should be able to survive most of what the enemy throws at you. To summarise, his biggest strength is his defensive side, but that can play into his offensive side if you do play it smart, and also try your best to not panic when shit hits the fan, because with his crazy health regen and defensive prowess, you can survive a lot of situations that other heroes might not. So moving on now to the hero vs villain game mode, and he is a really solid hero in these modes too, mostly because he's essentially a tank due to his defensive skills. Starting off with his star cards, and the first card that I'd recommend is the Jedi Resilience card that I mentioned earlier. The added health regen just makes him so much more of a tank, so this one is a no-brainer. The second card I'd recommend is the Perfect Defense card, and this one actually gives him up to 40% extra blocking stamina. His stamina is already just insane obviously, so this one causes him to be borderline unstoppable when it comes to defending himself. You can block around 35 lightsaber attacks, which is just absurd, almost tripling other heroes in the game, so this adds so much to his already powerful defense. The third card I'd recommend is the More Doubts card, and this one gives his restrictive mind trick an even longer range by up to 50%. This tends to be really useful against those pesky blaster heroes like Iden, Phasma or Boba for example, who are very reliant on their abilities to beat saber heroes, so if you can disable their abilities from even further away, that allows you to close ground much faster and deal with them before their abilities return. Now a fourth card to replace that one if you may be playing against only saber heroes for example is the Think It Over card, and this one just increases the actual time that mind trick is active. It adds a total of 1.4 seconds to the ability, taking it to 7.4 seconds all up, and that added time can really help to finish off enemies who are reliant on their abilities. So personally not my first choice, but it is another very helpful card. Now as for heroes that you need to look out for, the only two that I've put here are Iden and Darth Vader. Vader is Vader, I don't really need to say much. He's essentially the only hero who can out-tank Obi-Wan. And then with the fact that blocking is one of your biggest strengths, that makes Iden one of your biggest threats purely because she can consistently deal damage through your blocks, using her alternate fire, and it will also drain your stamina. So definitely play a little bit more aggressively around Iden and try taking her out rather than letting her control the pace of the fight, because trust me, she will just sit back and spam you if you don't make a move. Now finally moving on to just some regular tips for the hero game modes, and really his playstyle is actually pretty similar to the trooper modes. As I've said a million times at this point, his defense is absolutely pivotal to his survival. He can deal saber damage as much as anyone else really, but his abilities are much less damaging against heroes compared to the likes of Luke or Anakin for example, so your advantage mostly just comes from defense. As much as people hate it, and as much as I know people are going to be annoyed by me saying this, making the most of his block is definitely one of the better things you can do in these modes, as it's something that really can't be countered in that many different ways. If enemies want to just try and swing spam you, their stamina will run out before yours does, and then you can essentially just maul them once their stamina is depleted. So it is often a good idea to kind of just play it slowly and feel out your enemy, letting them make the first move and then figuring out how to play them from there. Obi-Wan has the liberty of being able to play each situation a little bit more strategically than most. Most other saber heroes just need to kind of send it and get as much damage as they can wherever possible, whereas Obi-Wan is much more of an opportunistic character, where you really just want to let the enemy show their hand and then pick them off when they make the wrong move. In terms of blaster heroes however, you can definitely play a little bit more aggressively, pushing them and swinging your saber to deal damage whenever possible, but then if you block in between every couple of swings and let them shoot you, you'll deal that damage back at them off their own blaster, and then they'll essentially just start to panic and roll around, and once they stop rolling, hit them, block and repeat, and honestly not many blaster heroes other than Iden or Boba can really do much against that. To summarise, be sure to play it slow and kind of let the enemy take control of the battle and make the first move, because then you can study how they play and figure out the best plan of attack to counter them, since your blocking stamina gives you plenty of time to think. And then as for blaster heroes, the attack, block and wait for them to stop rolling combination will give you an advantage over pretty much all of them other than Iden. So that is going to do it for this Obi-Wan hero guide guys. We are definitely getting towards the tail end of this series with only a handful of heroes left to cover, so I'm definitely excited to keep on pumping these out. If you enjoyed the video and it did help you guys out, then be sure to leave a like down below to support the channel, and be sure to subscribe with those notifications on so you don't miss out on any more Star Wars Battlefront 2 content. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Crush them! Make them suffer!